Hello, my lovely listeners. Welcome back to another episode of DRL, where we're talking everything dating, relationships, and love. Today on DRL, I'm joined by Alysse and Gio. Alysse is a plus-size model, and Gio is a transgendered male, and they're also an interracial couple. So these two come from very different worlds, but they're fighting for the same cause. So today they're going to share their story. So Gio, how did you come to where you are now? Like, how did you grow up, and how did you finally come to match your outside to your inside? Like, how was that journey for you?
That is a long road. Well, I grew up in it's a very interesting dynamic of family because they're liberal but conservative at the same time. My grandfather was the president and CEO of a nonprofit for a very, very long time. And so in that respect, it was always in the public eye. Our family kind of was, and my mom was a teacher. So it was always on the forefront that, people were so important and helping people, was important. So, when I decided to be myself, I thought that was kind of going to be okay.
Right.
But it wasn't so much in the beginning because that was not necessarily something that was really talked about in my family.
Right.
And so, I kind of learned to deal with that as I got a little bit older. And then when I joined the military, I was able to be a little bit more of myself, as an out person and in my more masculine self, even though I was still female identified at that point. But that gave me that separation from my family and from my background to kind of start fresh. But then, in the military, I had to deal with a different aspect of life.
Right.
Because I always tell people that when you're in the military as a minority female, you're virtually invisible.
Right. Agreed.
So that can be good or bad when you are on the LGBT spectrum. So that was a dynamic that I had to learn to deal with also for, many years. But then, after that, I got out of the military and came back to Ohio, and primarily at that point, I was already living totally male, even though I had not really understood what the term transgender was.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really even still have any understanding of that term. I just knew I was not who I was born. And, so I just used nicknames and always wore masculine clothing and whatnot. And a few years after being back home is kind of when it really kind of took form, and I learned more about the term and about the process. And at that point, I said, you know what, I have to just do what is best for me.
Right.
It was so many years of my life pleasing my family that at some point I had to not be miserable myself.
Right.
And the instant that I took charge of that, my life changed by leaps and bounds.
Did you always know that, I'm just in the wrong body? Or did you think, well, maybe I'm a lesbian, or maybe it's this, or maybe it's that? Or did you always sort of have a feeling that this is not the person I was meant to be?
I've known since I was 5 years old that I was not the person who I was born. But like I said, I did not know that there was a specific term or process for changing that.
Right.
So I pretended to be a lesbian per se, because I guess was the next closest thing. And that was the term that was a little bit more known. So yeah, I always knew who I was. Like I said, since I was 5, I knew that I definitely should have been born a boy.
How did your family take it?
Not well, even a little bit. My great grandparents like my safety blanket a little bit, and they were great. I initially did not tell either of them, and kind of because I'm very, very close with my Mima, she noticed, after I started hormones, and, she just told me one day, you got really fat. I was like, okay.
That's the thing about grandparents, though. They'll tell you stuff like that, like with no blinking of an eye, just like, by the way, you look fat. By the way, like, I'm like, thanks.
She didn't even miss a beat. And so, at that point...
which is something that happens when you start taking hormones.
Yes.
Like weight gain is sort of like... I'm just explaining for people who might not know.
Right. Thank you.
Let me tell my story.
Okay.
So, as I was saying, she, just kind of started piecing together the fact that I was going to the doctor more frequently. And because I never hide anything from her. So I would tell her when I was going to the doctor, and I just wouldn't tell her for what.
Right.
And so, I kind of then explained to her what I was doing. And she said, well, you have to tell your papa, right? And I said, yes, I know. And the moment I told him, he was fine. At that point, my parents already kind of knew, but they just did not care per se. It was not something that they cared to talk about. A little bit because they didn't really understand, and a little bit because that was not the path that my mother wanted me to take.
Right.
So it was very rough in the beginning dealing with my parents and my siblings, but eventually it started to soften when my nephew was born. He was like, my biggest advocate. He actually was born just a little bit before I decided to transition. But, once he could form his words, for him, I was always uncle. And that kind of helped, soften that blow for me and for them. And then when my niece came along, a few years ago, that took the cake because they're very much my largest advocates. Very, very much team me. And so that has helped, I think, have my family understand much more the person that I have become.
Got it. And now would you say they're fully on board and supportive?
Yes. I actually was just a part of a local project called #Trans Akron. And so basically it's a photo journal series that they did of 8 trans individuals who live in the city of Akron, and someone took pictures of us and then also chronicled a part of our story. And then they had like this giant unveiling of it, and my mother and my niece came down, and they were like just so ecstatic to be there and to be a part of it. And my niece was actually the only child that was there, but everyone like loved her, and everyone was just so supportive, and telling my mom how awesome they thought I was, and she was just like lit up like a Christmas tree. Aww. And I don't know if I ever thought that is where we would be with me in this journey.
Right. Especially given where you guys started. How did you guys meet and when?
We actually met at a networking event. Last October. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we met at a networking event that was held at this restaurant downtown, and it's pretty funny because neither of us wanted to even be there.
It was a networking event for the LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce in Northeast Ohio, and so they're really active in Cleveland, and this was their first time doing an Akron event. Mm-hmm. And since I lived in Akron, my mom was like, "You need to go," and his friend said the same thing. We both were like, "Ugh." I've been to those events so many times and just like kind of feel like I met all the same people.
Right.
But I was like, if this one's in Akron, like just go. So I went, and then as soon as he walked in, I was like, oh my God, who's that? I did try to find a way to talk to him, but then once we talked the whole night. So, and he asked for my number that night, and then we went out like 2 days later.
Wow.
Yeah.
I like when it's quick like that. Like, don't take my number and then call me weeks later, and then we go out months later. Like, I've already forgotten at that point.
I'm like far too anxious to play games. So like, if you take my number and I don't hear from you within like a few hours, I'm like, okay, he hates me, whatever. So it was
never doing this again
right away, because I would have been so anxious waiting. Because I feel like it is so hard to meet people organically. Like, to meet people in person is just rare, and I have nothing against online dating, but it's cool to me that we met in person. So
yeah,
that is great. Now, had you previously dated anybody transgendered?
I had, not in like a relationship, but I went out, like dated a person for like 2 months who was transgender, but he was at the very beginning of his transition and he was younger than me. And we just weren't like really at the same point in our lives. And like, I think he's a great guy and we just weren't really a good fit. So I had before, that was maybe like a year and a half before I met Gio, I would say. So yeah, I had before.
So it seems like from what I read in your bio that you've always been a big GLBTQ activist.
Mm-hmm.
So for you, how, I guess for a lot of people, what I hear from a lot of people who maybe aren't as in tuned, they say like, oh, you know, I don't mind transgendered people, but I wouldn't date one. I guess like, what would you say to somebody like that? And how, was it ever a big deal for you?
No.
Okay.
No, it wasn't ever a big deal for me. So I only like publicly came out in October, the same October that I met Gio, but I had been dating people of all genders like exclusively for 2 years. So when I ended my last relationship with like a cisgender man, I told myself if I didn't have a relationship outside of that I would regret it because I wasn't being true to myself. Right. And I was just kind of being held back by fear. So I made it a point to just try to put myself out there. And once I did that, I felt so much, I mean, it was obviously scary. I was like 28 years old and I felt like I was starting over, but it felt right. And it didn't feel as forced. And so once I kind of started really identifying as queer, I felt like, okay, well, I date people of all genders. People are people, and obviously trans people are people. So right, I like people. Like, to me, it wasn't an issue, and I never thought twice about it. So
that's awesome. Do you feel like that's maybe a part of your upbringing, or you get what I'm saying? Because I think for some people, it's something they have to think about. You get what I'm saying? Where for you, it was just a natural evolution into who you were and just knowing that people are people, but not everybody else is naturally in that state. So do you feel like that was just kind of how you grew up? Maybe your parents or the environment?
Yeah, because my mom was there when I met Gio, right? Yeah. So my mom met Gio the same night that I did. And then me and Gio were both selected independently before we knew each other.
I think even aside from that, yes, because of the simple fact that your mom is so involved in the community as an ally and on these different boards and whatnot, that
my mom
showed you already at that point that everyone was on the same playing field.
Right.
That will work as people. So I think what she's saying is other people don't have those same experiences.
Oh, yeah. My mom was always her best friend. When I was growing up, her son was gay. And so that was something that I knew from like a very early age. And then I also so acceptance was really encouraged like by my mom. And then I was a gender studies major in college. And so I took a queer theory class, and I remember my professor, she was queer and she was poly, and she like just really like opened my mind to this idea that like it's not gay or straight. There's a lot in between, and I learned about this, that sexuality can be fluid, and I started identifying as fluid at that point because I was like, I've never felt one way or the other. I've never kind of been all or nothing, like one or the other. I just didn't know that there was necessarily a term for that.
Right.
And I think a lot of my coming out journey, even though I was like such a big part of the community, I still had to kind of accept myself and learn to love myself. And as I did that, that's when, so I didn't come out later in life for like lack of accepting like the LGBTQ community, because I was very much a member of it. It was more just like a personal journey that I had to go on. And yeah, I guess my family is super accepting, which has been really great for us.
Right. I mean, a lot of people don't have that luxury, so that's amazing. I've never actually been to Akron. I've been to Cleveland quite a few times. How do people think of it there? And is it an accepting sort of community? And are you guys, ever looked at, or is it like you stand out in a way, or is it just, like in New York, for example, I feel like you see so many different things and so many different sorts of people and coming from so many different sort walks of life that you literally don't blink an eye when you see anybody walking down the street.
Right.
Is it similar in Akron, or is it very different?
I will say that for starters, no one knows that I am trans.
Okay.
I am never pegged for being trans. I am hyper masculine, and so that is never something that we ever have to deal with. Like people even blinking an eye about that. If anything, it would be because we are an interracial couple. Yeah. You know, that would be what people might like double take at. But as far as the LGBTQ community here, it's, you know, it's not a bad area for it. You never really hear of anything negative happening to people in this area, even those who are possibly known about or out or pegged for, you know, something. But yeah, us personally, no. Because like I said, if you did not know I was trans, you would not know I was trans.
Right.
So
yeah, we both sort of like out ourselves to do the advocacy work that we do, because we could just totally pass as not being part of the LGBTQ community.
Got it.
So we sort of do that in order to
bring awareness.
Yeah.
And
but yeah, I think we get way more hate, even like online, for being interracial, and then the size difference between us. Those two things, I think we get way more hate for because they're more visible.
Yeah.
So our size difference, and then the difference in race. But in terms of, we don't get that.
So what is that like, the interracial piece of it? And was that always something that was accepted in both of your families?
I have primarily only ever dated white women.
And I have primarily only dated people of color. So
yes.
So that's been day one for me, and day one for you.
Yes. Now I had never really dated someone who was plus size before her. Like, you know, I might have like dabbled here like casually, but never in a serious relationship. So that was something that was a little bit different. It was not hard at all. It was just definitely a different aspect of things. But, you know, interracial dating has always been a part of my life. And I think my family always kind of knew that I was going to end up with someone who was white.
Right. So you said dating somebody that was plus size was a different aspect of it for you. Why was that different? Just because you'd never done it, or like from the outside world, or what was different?
Because I had never done it, and I think probably until a few years ago, I had never even wanted to. And I guess that comes from being like a lifelong athlete and a lifelong person who not like put people in a box about size, but, you know, when you are someone who is like a health nut per se, you don't think necessarily that bigger people are as healthy and as physically active as some are. And so that was just not path that crossed for me.
Right.
I guess, you know, like I said, it was never something that I was like, oh, that's disgusting, or I would never do that. I just would be like, that's not my preference.
Right.
And you know, but as you grow and you mature and you meet different people and you have different connections, those things change.
And that was Gio's people are people moment, because I think just from a plus size perspective, I think there are so many stereotypes that are placed upon us that all plus size people are not healthy and all of these things that he kind of mentioned. Like, I don't necessarily ever hold anything against Gio for that perspective, because that's kind of what society conditions us to believe. And obviously he was able to see that, like, no, like, people of all sizes are beautiful and amazing people. And so I'm so glad. I think we both went on like a huge self-discovery journey, like around the same time. And we met at like the perfect time, because I think if we would have met 5 years ago, he would have broken my heart.
Probably.
And I would have been a mess, because I think we really needed to find our authentic selves separately before we could be the people that we are for each other. So in terms of dating, I always say that like being single is really valuable, and just using that time to kind of feel things out, and don't do the same thing. Like, just because you think you want to date a certain type of person, that might not be the person for you and the best person for you. So
now, Gio, how did you, I guess you said initially, like, you wouldn't have chosen a plus size person, but like, what was different to make you say, this isn't somebody I'd normally go for, but I'm going to try this anyway?
So before, at least my perspective had changed on that. I want to say probably 3 years ago, kind of when I got on Instagram, and I really started to see, different women in different bodies and how much they love themselves. And, my mom for most of my life was, plus size, she fluctuated. So it's not something that was not familiar to me. But yeah, so it was easy when I met Alysse because her personality is so awesome that already drew me in. Mm-hmm. And so everything else was secondary after that.
And Alysse, did you feel like there was any sort of convincing that had to be done, or you felt like once you guys met and got to know each other, he was fully on board and that wasn't going to be an issue?
Yeah. So one thing that I never really struggled with was that my first partner, my first love, he told me right from the beginning, he was like, to me, you're the beauty ideal. You are what I'm looking for. And in other parts of the world, thin is not what everybody wants. And when I heard that, I was like, that's mind blowing. And so because that was my first experience, I never settled for less than that. So I was never going to be someone's I'm just trying to date a big girl, or hiding me and not dating me in public. I never dealt with any of that because I had a great partner right from the beginning who was kind of you're my ideal. And I was like, I don't ever want to be with someone who's ashamed of who I am, because I don't deserve that. I deserve to be with someone who knows that I'm as beautiful as I know I am. And even though that took realizing and loving myself was a journey, I still knew right from the beginning that somebody wasn't going to settle for a bigger girl. So if Gio would have given me any indication that he was settling for me from the beginning, which he never did, he was always you're gorgeous, da, 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 da. So I would have sussed that out, and that was never an issue. I always knew that Gio was attracted to me, and
That's dope to always sort of have that sort of self-image and positivity, and not, because it's not the case for everybody. And I feel and
I've learned that a lot in the work that I do as a blogger. I know people want me to be able to have those horrific stories about dating. And of course, I've been fat shamed on dates, and, I've had those experiences. But in terms of relationships, I've never been in one with somebody who didn't love my body, because that was always a deal breaker for me. And I just never my body was never my biggest insecurity. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things Gio said about he saw these people on Instagram and he saw their confidence. I think he saw that on Instagram first, and then he saw that in me, because I am really confident in my body and in who I am. So,
and has it always kind of been that way for you, the body positivity, or was that in itself a growth and a transition?
Body positivity was something, again, kind of like Gio didn't know that being transgender existed. I didn't know that body positivity existed. I didn't know there was fat girls that loved themselves. So I always dressed the way I wanted to. I always say I wore rattleskin print pants in 7th grade and crop tops. I was always dressing really wild. That is nothing new. You can ask my mom; she will co-sign. I was always dressing wild, and I was always standing out because that's what I liked. But I kind of didn't have any awareness about the fact that that was a confident thing to do, because I was kind of insecure about who I was on the inside. So even though outwardly I was confident, I was so insecure on the inside that it never really radiated in the way that it does now. So my biggest insecurity was always about who I was on the inside. I thought I was too emotional, and I thought that I wasn't worthy of love, and all of these sort of things that I had to tackle were inside. And so once I tackled those, it was easy to connect the outside to the inside, because I never really felt bad about the way that I looked on the outside. That was never my biggest insecurity. And people always assume, based on the way that I look, like, oh, well, you must have always hated your body. And that was never number one on my list of things I hated about myself. So I have a different journey than other people, but I think that it's good that we can't just assume that every plus size person is like had spent all these years hating their body. And I did in some ways, but I definitely hated myself as a person more. That was what I had to tackle.
Now, how did you tackle that? What was going on the inside?
So I started in therapy like when I was in college, and when I broke up with the person that I mentioned, who was my first love, when I broke up, I started going to therapy again because I was like devastated about that breakup. And then I was like, oh, actually, I'm not that devastated about that breakup. I'm more like, I got a lot of other shit to work through. So, I started going to therapy. And then really once I started, my body positive journey, which I stumbled into just by posting pictures of myself on Instagram. I always say like the community found me because I didn't know it existed. And once I started posting pictures of myself, I found this community. And I really say like selfies saved my life because I was so afraid of being visible because I assumed that nobody would want to see me. Who would care what I had to say? Who would care what I could bring? I didn't find myself to be valuable. Mm-hmm. So once I started putting myself in front of the camera, because I was most confident with the way I looked. So it was easiest to start there, right? Rather than somewhere else. So I started with where I looked, and then I realized there was this whole community of people who loved themselves really unapologetically, and I learned from them. I filled my feed with other people who looked like me and who shared their stories of empowerment, and I just became a huge part of this community. I'm so used to talking about the plus size community. This is actually not about that for a change, but I became part of the plus size community, and it really changed my life. So just by putting myself out there through selfies and then now through blogging, my visibility helped me learn to love my voice as well. And now I consider that to be the most valuable part of the work that I do is the voice that I have.
I think that's probably the best thing to come out of social media is the fact that we've connected with people who feel and look just like us and are positive about it. And then you realize like, oh, whatever it is that I'm going through, like somebody else is doing the same thing and somebody else has come out on the other side, a better person, and so can I.
Right. It gives us this idea of interconnectedness. Right. And I thought it was interesting. I actually didn't know that Gio, kind of his perspective on beauty changed through Instagram. I think that's so interesting because mine did too. Right. I saw other people who looked like me and I was like, they're beautiful, I'm beautiful. So whenever somebody tells me that they log into social media and they see pictures and, she looks so good and and it makes them feel bad, I was like, well, that's your choice. Social media is curation. So you need to curate it to make you feel great.
Exactly.
And I think that it can totally change your perspective on beauty, on anything that you're dealing with. You can find somebody on social media who's dealing with the same thing. And I think that that's so powerful. And I think, like, just to bring it back, I think us as a couple, there's not a lot of couples like us, and we know, like, we're interracial, we're two different sizes, trans and cis, queer and straight. Like, there's not a lot of couples that are opposites in so many ways. So right. I think that...
Which is so dope because that means you guys have so much to learn from each other.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. And we do every day. We learn from each other every day.
Yeah. I would say this relationship has been the most challenging for me, but in the most amazing way because Gio makes me think about things that nobody ever challenged me to think about before. And he approaches me in the same way he approaches anybody he's ever speaking to, with compassion and respect. And he's really good at meeting people where they're at. And I feel like he could educate anybody just because of his approach. And so I feel honored that I get to be around Gio every single day and learn. And I become a better advocate as well because he's so willing to share, the things that he's been through. So
how long have you guys been together? Did you say about a year?
No.
7
months.
No.
October.
Yeah. So
of 2017.
Months. Yeah. So almost 9 months.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Our math is not that great.
Right.
Now, are you guys at the point, have you guys talked marriage, or is that something either or both of you want?
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. No.
He's driving it home every day. No, we probably talked about that on the second date.
First date. He told me what sneakers he was going to wear to our wedding on our first date.
That's true.
You did.
I forgot. Yes.
And I was like, at that point, I knew nothing about sneakers. Now I could probably tell you what those sneakers are worth, what year they can. I mean, I have learned so much about sneakers.
Oh, Gio, you're a sneakerhead.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, yeah. Hardcore. But yeah, because I think, at the age that we are at, it doesn't make sense to waste any time. So if you know, then you have those conversations, and we do, and our families talk about it. And I mean, if I asked her to marry me right now, she would say yes and do a backflip, and she would call her mom, and her mom would say yes and do a backflip, because that's just how interconnected we are.
Right.
And I think that, some people say, oh, well, how could you know that soon? Well, we've basically been inseparable since we started dating. And so that gives you a lot of time to, learn someone and know what works for you and what works for them. And like I said, it doesn't pay to waste any time. So we've definitely talked about marriage. It's a daily conversation.
Oh my God, it is not.
Every day she asks me to marry her.
Oh my God. But I think, like, to Gio's point, that you know that something feels different. And I think for both of us, because we had gone on these journeys of self-discovery, it was hard to date people during that time.
Yes.
And I think, like, we both tried and it just never really worked because we weren't really there. And then we both sort of took breaks. And like, I had just broken up with someone 3 days before I met Gio. And I would have never thought I would meet, like, the person I hope to spend the rest of my life with 3 days after that breakup, because I was, like, devastated. And you just never know when the right person is going to come in your life. But the best thing that you can do is make sure that you're always working on being your best self, because I think we came into this as our best selves. And so anything that we do together, we're coming at it from a place of, we already understand how to have difficult conversations, and we've already experienced loss and trauma, and we've both been through a lot in our lives. And we both live publicly as advocates, which is something that not everybody understands.
Right.
So we've both been through a lot, and I think that helped us come together. When we met, everybody was like, this makes a lot of sense. Like, you guys are equals. And people always said that, you're equal. And I was like, I don't know that they're out there. Right. And I thought the same thing. So,
do you guys live together?
Yes.
We do.
How soon after did you guys move in together?
Officially, probably 4.5, 5 months officially.
But he asked me to move in with him like 2 months in.
Yeah.
And then we just had to sort of make it happen. But I was always over here. I think it was rare that we spent a night apart, even before I moved in officially. Yeah. So we just have a heart, like, we just want to be together all the time. Like, we have a lot of fun together, and we have, like, our routines, and, we watch Family Feud every night. We have these games together. Like, we love playing Skippo. Like, we just, like, we have a fun life together, even though people see the very public side of our relationship. Right. They see the photo shoots, they see the traveling, they see the accomplishments. What they don't see is that we have a really genuine connection of love. We're both really family orientated. Like, he has totally, like, made my nephews his own, and really stepped in that uncle role, which they didn't have. And, I feel the same way about his niece and nephew. And we've just really been integrated into each other's lives and families right from the beginning, which I think has strengthened that bond because of how important family is to both of us. So,
what is your favorite thing about Gio, Alysse?
Oh my goodness. That's a hard question. There's so many things I love about Gio, but I think what I love about Gio is something that I don't necessarily always see in myself, which is his ability to see the big picture of things. And he always, when I get stuck in a rut, or when I am thinking that, when I feel hopeless, he's always able to kind of snap me out of it He does this for everybody. He's just always willing to think big and have vision. I think Gio is a visionary, and I love that he has vision for our life together. He has vision for how he wants to change the world to be more accepting, and he brings that vision to everything that he does. He's the hardest working person that I know, and he doesn't give up, and I really admire all those things about him.
Aww.
Gio, it was hard to answer. Yeah. There's too many.
Gio, what's your favorite thing about Alyse?
My favorite thing about Alyse is her courage and determination, because they're kind of one and the same. To be able to be vulnerable every day in, your life, whether it's personal or public, but have that strength, to not really get flustered by it is something that, takes a lot of courage and determination, because, posting pictures of yourself every day just to the whole world is not something that's easy to do,
right,
because a lot of us do it at a more sheltered experience. We post on our, social media for people that we actually know and that we are almost positive, love and support us, and that's not something that she does, because of her professional field. And so to almost never see her get upset or flustered by comments or posts or anything that could be negative is something that I absolutely love and admire. And like I said, it takes a lot. It takes a lot to be able to do that every single day. And she does it, and she does it well.
Thank you. I'm going to cry. That's so sweet.
You two are very good compliments for each other. One, in the ways that you're different and are able to learn from each other. And two, in the ways that you're alike and sort of fighting for the same causes.
Yeah, I think what always struck me about us on a surface level is the fact that we're both fighting for marginalized people. And I would say that they're not necessarily the marginalizations that we talk about the most. So I think us both being advocates for different communities, but in the same way we're both working on creating more visibility for people like us. We also, in turn, help do it for each other now. And just this weekend, I had multiple people come up to me and ask me questions about gender identity and about sexual orientation. And I feel like now I have the opportunity to educate people in a way that I wasn't before, but I always wanted to, but maybe they didn't know that I was someone who could educate them. And I feel like now I can educate in a new way, I think. And I think that's really great that we are kind of fighting a similar fight, and now we're fighting it together, like holding hands, I feel like.
I think that people, they see us and they admire us as a couple and the work, that we do together and individually. And like she said, they see us, take these awesome trips and have fun. But like she said, what they don't see is, that we absolutely love to be around each other. We play games and stuff, but I think, I got very lucky when I found her because, we do a lot on ourselves. I'm in school again. And, what people don't see is us sitting up till 2 a.m. doing homework,
right.
And her being willing to, read the book with me and help me take a test and all of these things. We were just in Chicago last weekend and, we drove, and on the way home, we stopped at a rest stop to get food, and I had to bust out my laptop to take an exam. We're at the rest stop taking an exam. And, the fact that she is so willing to do that with me because she cares about my success just as much or more sometimes, I think, than I do, is important, because it's not easy to be taking 3 classes and to work a full-time job and to run a nonprofit full-time and to do 1 billion speaking engagements. And that's literally what I do every day.
But I get it because I am a freelance writer and I am a marketer and I'm a blogger and we both came in this as very busy whole people.
Right.
So it wasn't hard for us to relate to each other because I was like, he's on my level. I get his grind because I have the same grind. So if there's something I can do to help, I'm always going to. And same with him. Like, we have both taken off of work to go see each other speak. And he literally last week, he worked all day for 8 hours and then drove 6 hours to Chicago to come meet up with me because I was there for an event and for a photo shoot. So we both do stuff like that all the time, really that was never a discussion.
Right.
That was just something that we both were like, okay, we're going to support each other in that way because I get it. And I think also for me, I know what it's like to do it alone and I know I can, but I'm so glad I don't have to anymore.
Right. And it's so important. I actually just had an interview yesterday where the guy was saying that the reason him and his last girlfriend broke up was he just really had all these dreams and he was new to his career and he was just really on the grind and she just didn't get it. She was just like, why aren't we spending more time together? And you need that support system.
Yeah, I think for us right away, we knew we weren't going to slow down. So if, let's say I'm going to make a jewelry order, he'll come and work on stuff with a nonprofit, or if he's doing homework, I'll do freelance writing or whatever. So we're just busy together.
Right.
We'll be sitting next to each other, or even if one of us is working and one is napping, we're still in the same room physically, because I think just that closeness has always been really important to us.
The transgendered community is right now, I guess, the last community where it's okay for the broader population to say things like, well, it's cool, but it's just not something I would do, right? So I hear a lot of people say stuff like that. And what I always say is, well, let's just turn that around for a second. How would it be if somebody said, Black people are cool and they could do whatever they want to do, but I would just never date one. Or
that too.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I'm saying? So it's when you really start to just replace it, it's you would never say that. That would never fly. But at the point in time that we are, it seems like it still flies to say, oh, yeah, transgender people are cool, but I would just never date one. So how does a person get over that mindset, and how do people who are open but aren't necessarily a part of the GLBTQ community help other people get over that mindset?
Well, I think first of all, even if they think they haven't, they've met and interacted and probably had a great experience with a trans person and didn't even know.
Right.
I think that's something that's really important. You hear this a lot in the bathroom conversation. That's one of those issues that people talk about. But you already know trans people. You already probably love them and have had great interactions. So if this is something you're afraid of, you didn't even know you were interacting. Probably. I think.
Yeah, that's probably my absolute favorite way to tackle that ignorance. Because people are so drawn to me. I always seem to get those people who feel so strongly about the LGBTQ community venting to me, and they never know who they're venting to.
Right.
Get to have the ultimate last laugh when I say, actually, I'm trans, and they're like, no, you're not. And I'm like, yes, I am. And then they're just mind blown right in front of me. And I think sometimes being that real person in front of people is the only way to combat that ignorance, because that's really all it is ignorance. And because at this point you can't say it's from lack of knowledge, because Google is a fabulous resource.
Right.
And virtually everyone, in America per se, has access to the internet, whether it's in your home or whether it's at the library or whether it's at your friend's house or, on your cell phone. People don't know because people don't want to know.
Right.
And that is hard to educate when you just don't want to know. That is a totally different type of animal to deal with. But the people who are the most verbal about it are the people who actually probably want to know the most, but they want it to be in a capacity that works for them. And like I said, that is some of the rare instances where I out myself as trans, because it is like the perfect moment to kind of show them, A, how quickly karma comes back. And,
that is you all day.
Yeah, because I am 100% a savage. And then also to, show them like it is very, very normal. Because like I said, people never, ever, 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 ever question that I am anything other than a cisgender man. Mm-hmm. And so whenever I challenge that and open their eyes to that, it definitely shows. And so I think those are the ways that it works. And it's very hard for, people who are allies to attest to that because it's not their journey.
Right.
And I am 100% a firm believer of really only speaking about your own personal journey.
Right.
I like always tell people whenever I do, interviews and they ask about Alysse and I say, she identifies as queer. That is her preference. That is something that I try not to speak on because, that's her story. So, it's always easier to say, you know what? I understand, where you're coming from. I hear what you're saying. Maybe, speak to X, Y, and Z person. Maybe they can give you a different perspective on that. If you by chance do know someone who is trans and willing to have those conversations. But, sometimes you just have to let those people be because you're beating a dead horse.
Right.
And it's not worth your energy.
Right. Yeah, I feel like there's something so valuable in Gio's ability to share his experience, but I also feel like that burden shouldn't completely be on him and on trans people. So when people ask me, I always say like, hey, there's this really great interview that Gio did on Transacron, or I always direct people to places where he's already done the work. Right. So they can read about it and because he has done such a good job in sharing his journey already that like you don't even have to directly ask him a question. You can read it. He's given that information. And I think like you sharing your journey has really opened a lot of people's eyes. And I think that that's really important because that shouldn't be your burden to educate people. And you do that.
Well, you guys have certainly educated me a little bit today. A lot, actually. And I love your story. And I love that, like I said, like you guys come from different worlds, but you're fighting for the same thing. And like, that's dope. And I think a big part of the issue is just like you said, Gio, like people's, feeling like, well, this doesn't affect me or it's not in my world. And so they don't want to know, but it's like, it probably does. You just don't know it yet. Mm-hmm. So where can people like reach you guys on social media or to, connect with you, see your engagements or what you have going on?
So you can find me everywhere on social media at Ready to Stare. That's the name of my blog. It's Ready to Stare. And it's also readytostare.com is my blog. And I'm everywhere public on the internet and highly visible. And Gio is the total opposite. So if you see him, it is probably on my page. But he also has a Facebook for his nonprofit, which is called Meta Center Inc. And you can find that on Facebook.
Or I do have a professional Facebook. So if someone needs, to know that, they can find me at Giovanni Santiago, and it's Giobonni, last name Santiago. Like I said, that's my professional Facebook. And then also Meta has an email. So it's metacenterinc@gmail.com. But those are the easiest ways to be accessible for information.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on DRL and sharing your story. And thank you so much for tuning in today, guys. Please reach out to me. Let me know what you think of today's show. You can reach me at Tanisha Wood on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And also you can find more information at drlpodcast.com. And until next time, wish me love. Hello again, my lovely listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of DRL. If you like the show, be sure to go on iTunes and leave a rating and also write a review. And don't forget to share with your friends and tell them all about DRL. Thank you so much for supporting.